Clara Whitmore pressed her dead husband's last silver dollars into her palm and stepped forward before her courage could fail her. $25. She said for the calf, nobody would touch the one the whole town had already buried in their minds. Laughter cracked across the auction yard like a bullwhip. She did not flinch. If this story moves you, subscribe and follow Clara's fight all the way to the end, and comment the name of the city you're watching from, so I can see just how far her story is able to travel. The gavel had not even come down yet when the laughing started. Clara Whitmore heard it roll through the crowd behind her, that low, mean chuckle men make when they think a woman has finally shown them the shape of her foolishness. She kept her chin level. She kept her eyes on the calf. "Say that again, ma'am," the auctioneer asked. He leaned over the rail, squinting like maybe the heat had gotten into his ears. "You bidding on that one?" $25, Clara said. "You heard me plain the first time." "I heard you." He scratched under his hat. "I just don't believe you." Somebody in the back hollered, "Let her have it. Save us the trouble of shooting it." The yard shook with it. Men slapped their knees. A rancher named Dobbs laughed so hard he had to grab the fence. And in the middle of all that noise, Clara stood dead still, both hands closed around the coins her husband had left in a coffee tin under the floorboards. The coins she had counted 40 times the night before, and 40 times that morning, the coins that were every last thing between her and the county road. $25. It was more than the calf was worth. Everyone in that yard knew it. She knew it too. That was the terrible part. She knew it too. The calf stood in the far corner of the pen where they'd shoved the ones nobody wanted. It could barely hold its own weight. Its ribs stood out like the slats of a broken crate, and its coat had gone dull and patchy, and one of its back legs trembled when it shifted like the ground itself was too much to ask of it. Its mother had died of the fever that swept through the Barham herd that spring, and an orphan calf half-starved and shaking was to every practical man there already a dead thing that hadn't finished the job. "Going once," the auctioneer said, and he said it gently, the way you'd speak to someone who'd wandered too near the edge of a cliff. "Ma'am, I got to tell you honest, this here's mercy money. You'd do better lighting it on fire." "Going twice then," Clara said. "If you're done talking." Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that later, remembering it. Her hands shook down at her sides, hidden in her skirts. They shook like the calf's bad leg, but her voice held, and that was the only thing the crowd could see. And so that was the only thing that was true to them. Sold. The gavel dropped. To the widow Whitmore, for $25. Lord have mercy on us all. She walked to the little table where a clerk in a sweat-dark collar took her money. She laid the coins down one at a time. 25 of them, the last of Samuel gone across a plank table for a calf that could not stand straight. "You sure about this, Ms. Whitmore?" the clerk said low so the others wouldn't hear him being kind. "Ain't no shame in changing your mind. I can call it a misspeak." "I'm sure," Clara said. She was not sure. She had never in her life been less sure of anything. But she had learned something in the 11 months since they'd put Samuel in the ground, and it was this, that certainty was a luxury for people who still had choices. She did not have choices. She had a mortgaged 40 acres, a leaking roof, a garden the grasshoppers had eaten twice, and a debt to the cattleman's bank that came due in the fall. And she had now a dying calf. "Then it's yours," the clerk said, and he pushed the receipt across, and he would not meet her eye when he did it. Victor Hale had not laughed. Clara noticed that walking back through the yard with the lead rope over her shoulder. All around her men were still enjoying themselves at her expense, but Hale stood by his wagon with his thumbs in his vest and his fine gray hat, and he watched her come with an expression she could not name. Not amusement. Not pity either. Something colder and more careful, the look of a man doing arithmetic. He was the biggest cattleman in 3 counties. His herd ran the river bottom, the best grass, and the only reliable water for a hard day's ride in any direction, and everything he touched turned to money, and everything that stood in his way learned sooner or later to move. He had bought out the Petersons. He had bought out the Cleary place. He had folks whispered, more or less bought the bank, and the bank was the thing that had its hand around Clara's throat. Ms. Whitmore. He touched the brim of his hat. Even that from him felt like a warning. That was a sentimental thing you just did. Was it, Mr. Hale? $25. He shook his head slowly. You know what I'd have given for that animal? Nothing, Clara said. You'd have given nothing. That's why it was in the mercy pen. Something flickered behind his eyes. He did not care for being answered back. She saw that plainly, the small tightening at the corner of his mouth, the way his thumb pressed a little harder into the vest. And she understood in that instant that Victor Hale was not a man who was cruel because he enjoyed it. He was worse than that. He was cruel the way weather is cruel without heat, because it did not occur to him that the small things underfoot had any say in the matter. I'll tell you what I think, he said. I think a woman alone out here is a hard thing, hardest thing there is. And I think a woman alone who throws away her last dollar on a dead calf, he let that hang, is a woman who's decided to lose. And I don't hold it against her. I truly don't. I only wish somebody'd told her sooner. It'd be kinder to quit. You've told me now, Clara said. So your conscience is clear. She led the calf away before he could answer. She could feel his eyes on her back the whole length of the yard, and she made herself walk slow, made herself walk like a woman with somewhere to be, because she knew she had learned this from Samuel. God rest him, that the moment you let a man like that see you hurry is the moment he owns you. The calf couldn't make the whole 4 miles home. It got 1.5 miles, maybe less, before its legs simply folded under it in the middle of the road, and it went down in the dust and would not get up. Clara knelt beside it. She did not curse. She did not cry, though the wanting to was a hot pressure behind her eyes. All right, she said to it. All right now. Nobody's rushing you but the sun. The calf's flank heaved. Its eye rolled toward her wide and wet and frightened, and Clara put her hand flat against its neck, and felt the heart going in there quick and light, a scared little drum. Alive. Whatever else was wrong with it, whatever the fever had taken, and the hunger had whittled down under all of that, the heart was going. Fast, but going. You feel that? She whispered. I feel it. You quit whenever you're ready to quit. But I'm telling you now, I paid $25 for that heartbeat, and I aim to get my money's worth. That was when the boy showed up. He came out of the sage at the edge of the road, a skinny, tow-headed thing of maybe 11, with a face full of freckles and a hat too big for him. Tommy Lane. She knew the family. They had less than she did, which was saying something. He gonna die, Ms. Whitmore. Not today, he ain't. He looks like he's gonna. Well. Clara wiped her face with the back of her wrist. So did I come to think of it about a year back, and here I am pestering calves in the road. Come help me, or go home Tommy Lane, but don't stand there predicting the poor thing's funeral where it can hear you. The boy came and helped. It took them the better part of 2 hours to get the calf up and moving, and stopped and up again, the two of them shoving and coaxing and hauling that trembling animal the last 2.5 miles to Clara's barn. By the time they got it into a stall, bedded with the last of her good straw, the sun was low, and Tommy's shirt was soaked through, and Clara's arms shook with the strain of it. Why'd you buy him? The boy asked. He asked it plain the way children do, with no meanness in it, which was somehow worse than the meanness in the yard. Everybody says you're broke. My pa says you're broker'n us. Why'd you spend your money on a dead calf? Clara sat down on an upturned bucket. She looked at the calf, and the calf looked back at her from the straw with that big, wet, frightened eye, and for a long moment she didn't have an answer that would make sense to a boy of 11 or to anyone. You ever watch something get given up on? She said finally. Sure. And did it seem right to you? Tommy thought about it. He was a serious boy under the freckles. Depends, he said. Sometimes a thing's just done. My grandpa was done. Wasn't nothing anybody could do. That's true, Clara said. Sometimes a thing is done. But here's what I've come to know, Tommy, and I'll trade it to you for your help today, and you can keep it or throw it away. Most times when a crowd of grown men decide something's worthless, they haven't decided a thing about the animal at all. They've only decided about themselves. They've decided they don't want the trouble. She nodded at the stall. That calf isn't worthless. It's inconvenient. Those aren't the same, though the whole county'll tell you they are. The boy chewed on that. Reckon I'll come back tomorrow, he said. See if you're right. Reckon you do that. She was not right. Not for a long while. That was the part Clara never told people afterward, when the story had gotten big and shiny, and folks wanted it simple, the widow and the miracle calf. It wasn't a miracle, it was a war, and for weeks she was losing it. The calf wouldn't take milk from a pail. She had to teach it sitting in the straw at 4 a.m. with her fingers in its mouth, guiding it to the rag the way you'd teach a newborn, and it fought her weak as it was out of pure animal terror. It scoured, got the run so bad she thought twice it had died. In the night, went out with the lantern shaking, and found it flat on its side, and had to get right down on her knees in the muck and put her ear to its chest to hear the heart still going. Still. Going. That stubborn, light, quick drum. You are the most contrary creature God ever made. She told it on her knees in the dark, half laughing and half something else. You want to live so bad you're half killing yourself with it. She named it then. She hadn't meant to. Naming a thing is a promise, and she'd been trying not to make promises she couldn't keep. But it came out of her anyway, kneeling there. Dusty, she said. On account of you're the color of the road that near finished you, and on account of you didn't stay down in it, Dusty. Her neighbor, Henrik Sorensen, came by in the second week. He was a Dane, a widower himself, older, with a slow, deep way of talking, and hands the size of skillets, and he'd kept to himself mostly since his wife passed, but he'd heard about the auction. Everyone had heard about the auction, and he stood at Clara's fence a long time before he said anything. They are saying in town you have lost your mind, he told her. They've been saying that 11 months, Mr. Sorensen. It's not fresh news. He nodded slowly. He looked at Dusty a good while. Then he said something Clara did not expect. My father raised cattle in the old country. Poor cattle. Poor land. He rubbed his jaw. There is a thing, he told me. The strongest calf is not the fat one. The fat one had it easy. The fat one never learned. He said you want the one that fought to stay alive when it was small. Because that one, ma'am, that one remembers how. Clara stared at him. You believe that, she said. I believe I am too old to laugh at a woman for hoping, Henrik said. The town can do the laughing. They have more energy for it. He tipped his hat and turned to go, and then over his shoulder, almost like he was ashamed of the kindness. I have some good hay in the west shed. Old but clean. I will bring it. A calf like that, he needs to eat what he can hold down little and often, not much at once. His stomach is small yet. Mr. Sorensen, I can't pay you for hay. He stopped. He didn't turn around all the way. My Anna died in the summer, he said. 2 years now, in the summer like this, hot like this. A pause long and heavy. The neighbors, they came. They did not ask, can you pay? They only came. He put his hat back on. I will bring the hay tomorrow, Ms. Whitmore. You will not speak of paying. By the end of the month, Dusty was standing on his own. By the end of the second, the bad leg had stopped its trembling, and the ribs had gone from fence slats to just lean. And there was something in the way the calf held its head. Clara couldn't have put words to it, but Henrik could. There, the old Dane said, watching it move across the pen one evening. You see, he watches everything. The fat calf he does not watch. He does not need to. This one, Henrik pointed with his chin, this one learned that the world will kill you if you stop paying attention. He will never forget it. It is in him now. Down deep. You make it sound like a gift, Clara said. It is the only gift the hard road gives, Henrik said. But it is a real one. The trouble was the county did not see any of that. The county saw a widow and a scrub calf, and the county had decided how that story ended, and it did not appreciate being kept waiting. When Clara took her few eggs into town to sell Mrs. Dobbs, and the church women went quiet when she passed, and loud again behind her. When she stopped at the mercantile Hollis behind the counter, added her sums twice slow, so she'd feel the weight of every cent. And twice, She found her fence rails down on the roadside, the good posts pulled clean out of the earth, and cattle tracks going in and out of her thin grass. Big cattle, fat cattle, bar M cattle. She never could prove it was Hale's men. But she stood at the broken fence the second time with her jaw set so hard it ached, and she said out loud to nobody, "You want me gone by fall? I know it. You want that banknote to swallow me whole, and you'll grease every skid you can find." She spat in the dust. It was not ladylike. She had stopped caring about ladylike somewhere around the 4th month of widowhood. "Well, Mr. Hale, come fall, we'll see what's worthless and what ain't." And then the doubt would come, the way it always came at night in the dark, with the note on the table, and the numbers not adding up no matter how she moved them around. Because here was the thing. Nobody in town knew. The thing she'd never say to Tommy or even to Henrik. She was not a saint. She had not bought that calf out of some pure, shining courage. She had bought it because on that morning, standing in that yard with her husband's last coins going hot in her fist, she had looked at that shaking, given up on half-dead animal that the whole world had already written off, and she had seen herself. That was the true reason. Not charity, not vision, recognition. She had looked at that calf and seen a widow at the edge of a county road, and she had not been able to bear watching one more given-up-on thing get quietly done away with. Because if that calf was worthless, then so was she. And she was not ready. She was not near ready to believe that yet. "Am I a fool?" she asked Henrik once straight out, the way she never let herself ask anyone. "Tell me true, not kind, true. Am I throwing good years after a lost cause because I can't stand to admit the cause is lost?" The old Dane was quiet a long time. "Maybe," he said at last, and she flinched because she'd wanted him to say no. "Maybe you are. This is possible." Then he looked at her level from under his gray brows. "But I will tell you what I have learned about lost causes, Ms. Whitmore. Most of them are not lost. Most of them are only slow. And the world, it cannot tell the difference between slow and lost. It has no patience. So it calls them the same, and it walks away." He nodded toward the pen where Dusty stood watching them both with those dark, alert, ready eyes. "You are one of the few people I have met who can wait. That is not foolishness. That is a rare and expensive thing. Do not let them shame you out of it." Chapter 1. The summer bore down. It came in mean, and it stayed mean, the kind of heat that cracks the ground and burns the grass to wire, and makes every rancher in the valley start doing the same nervous arithmetic Victor Hale had done in the auction yard. How much water? How much hay? How many head can I carry through to the rains, and when will the rains come, and dear God, what if they don't? Clara did her own arithmetic. It was worse than everyone's. She had less grass than anyone, less water, less money, less time. The banknote sat on her table like a spider. And into all of that, she poured herself into one scrub calf named after a road, feeding it little. And often, the way Henrik had taught her, watching it grow lean and quick and strangely stubbornly sound. Tommy came near every day now. He'd taken to Dusty something fierce. "He's smart, Ms. Whitmore," the boy said one evening, leaning on the pen. "Smarter'n Hale's fancy stock, I bet. I seen him. When the water in the trough gets low and warm, the other stock won't touch it and gets ornery. Dusty drinks it anyhow. Don't complain. Just drinks and gets on." "That's not smart exactly," Clara said. "That's he remembers being thirsty for real, nearly died of it. So a warm trough doesn't scare him. He's had worse and lived." She caught herself, and something turned over slow in her chest, a thought she hadn't quite had until she heard it come out of her own mouth. "He's had worse and lived, Tommy, and it made him able to take a thing that lays the others low." The boy looked at her. "That a good thing," he said. Clara Whitmore stood at the fence in the killing heat of that first hard summer with a banknote waiting on her table and a whole county laughing at her back, and her dead husband's $25 turned into one lean, watchful animal that would not quit. And for the first time in 11 months, she felt something move in her that was not grief and was not fear. "Tommy Lane," she said quietly. "I believe it might be the best thing there is." That thought stayed with her only until morning, because by morning the trouble had a name, and the name rode a fine sorrel mare up her lane before she'd even finished the milking. Clara heard the hoofbeats and set the pail down slow. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked out to meet him, and she made herself walk the way she'd walked out of that auction yard, slow, like a woman with somewhere to be. Even though her heart had already started up its scared little drumming, the same beat she'd felt under Dusty's neck in the road. The man reined up short of the gate. He was one of Hale's. She knew him by the hat and the way he sat a horse like he owned the ground it stood on. Cole Rennick, the Bar M foreman, a lean, hard man with a voice like a gate hinge. "Ms. Whitmore." He didn't get down. That was the first insult, and he meant it as one. "Mr. Hale sends his respects." "Does he?" "He does, and he sends an offer along with them." Rennick reached into his vest and came out with a folded paper, and he leaned down and held it over the gate for her to take, and Clara did not move to take it. She let it hang there in his hand until his arm got tired of holding it out to nobody. "You can say it out loud," she said. "I read fine, but I'd sooner hear a man say a thing to my face than hide it in a paper." Rennick's jaw worked. He didn't like that. "All right," he said. "Mr. Hale will pay off your note to the Cattleman's Bank, the whole of it, and he'll give you $200 cash on top and a wagon to move your things. All you got to do is sign over the 40 acres and be gone by the end of the month. $200. The number went through her like cold water. It was more money than she'd seen in a year. It would settle the note, and it would carry her east, and it would be an end to the heat and the whispers and the broken fences and the arithmetic that never came out right. She thought about it. She'd have been a liar to say she didn't. She stood there with her husband's 40 acres at her back and a foreman's cold eyes on her, and she thought about the road east and how quiet it would be, how nobody there would know she was the widow who'd wasted $25 on a dead calf. "And the calf," Clara said. "Where's the calf in that offer?" Rennick blinked. "The what?" "The calf, Dusty. When I sign over the 40 and take the 200 and drive off in Mr. Hale's borrowed wagon. Does the calf come with me or does it stay?" The foreman actually laughed short and mean. "That scrub ma'am Mr. Hale don't want that thing. You can drag it behind the wagon for all he cares. Feed it to your dogs." And there it was. Clara felt the cold water in her go warm again, and then hot, and she understood something standing at that gate that she had not fully understood before, that Hale didn't want her land because it was good. It wasn't good. It was thin and dry and mortgaged past its worth. He wanted it because she was on it, and because she had stood in that yard and answered him back, and because a man like Victor Hale could not abide a thing he'd written off, refusing to lie down and finish dying. "You tell Mr. Hale I said thank you kindly," Clara said, and I said no. "Ma'am, I said no, Mr. Rennick, and you can carry it to him in a paper or on your tongue, I don't care which, but you carry it plain." The widow Whitmore said no. Rennick straightened in the saddle. The friendliness, what little there'd been of it, went out of him like a snuffed lamp. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You know that a woman alone that note come and due. You got no idea the mistake you're making." "I've been told," Clara said, repeatedly, by experts. "Now get off my lane." He sat there a moment longer, letting her feel the size of him, and the size of the man behind him, and then he wheeled the sorrel around hard and put it down the lane at a lope that threw grit halfway to the barn. Clara stood at the gate until he was gone from sight. Then, and only then, she let her hands start shaking, and she gripped the top rail till the trembling passed, and she said low to nobody, $200, Samuel. I turned down $200 for a piece of dirt you couldn't grow beans on and a calf everybody says is dead." She laughed once, and it caught wrong in her throat. "Tell me I'm not a fool. Go on, tell me from wherever you are." Samuel didn't answer. He never did anymore. But from the pen behind her came a low, dry, contrary bawl. And when Clara turned, Dusty was standing at the rail watching her with those dark, alert eyes, and for reasons she couldn't have explained, it steadied her more than any voice could have. "Yeah," she said to the calf. "You'd have said no too, contrary as you are." She didn't tell Tommy about the offer. She told Henrik because Henrik was the only soul in the valley she trusted to hear it without either scolding her or pitying her. And because the old Dane had a way of turning a thing over until you could see the underside of it. He heard her out leaning on his own fence, his big hands folded, and when she finished he was quiet a long while. $200, he said finally. I know. And the note paid. I know it, Henrik. I lay awake with it. You don't have to say the number back to me, I got it memorized. I am not saying it to shame you. He pulled at his lip. I am saying it because a man does not offer $200 and a paid note for 40 acres of thin grass. Not Hale. Hale does not spend $1 he cannot get back too. He looked at her sidelong. So I am asking myself, Ms. Whitmore, what does he think he is buying? Me gone, Clara said. Same as always, he can't stand that I stayed. Maybe. Henrik didn't sound sure. Maybe that is all. A proud man, and insult a woman who will not run. He nodded slowly. But Hale is not only proud, he is greedy, and the greed came first. The pride he grew later to protect the greed. He straightened up off the fence. I would keep my eyes open if I were you. When a greedy man offers you too much for a thing you thought was worthless, it is because he knows something about that thing that you do not. Clara felt a small chill go down her spine standing in the full heat of the day. There's nothing on that land, Henrik. No gold, no water. God knows I've dug enough of it. It's dirt. I did not say the land, Henrik said. And he looked when he said it, not at her land at all. He looked past her down the lane toward the pen where a lean, dust-colored calf stood watching the both of them with the patient, ready, wary eyes of a thing that had already learned the world would kill you if you stopped paying attention. The drought did not break, it dug in. The creek that ran the back corner of Clara's 40 had never been much a thin brown ribbon in a good year, and by the deep of that summer it had gone to a string of shrinking mudholes, and then to cracked clay, and then to nothing at all. She hauled water from the well by hand bucket after bucket, her shoulders on fire, and she watered her garden dead first, and her calf second, and herself last. And still the well came up lower each morning, the rope playing out longer before the bucket kissed water. She'd stand at the well, head in the gray before dawn, and listen for the splash, and count the seconds it took to come. And the seconds got longer, and each morning that was its own small terror. A cliff. She walked up to and looked over. How's your water? She asked Tommy, hauling with her one morning, because Misery loved the company of children who didn't know better than to answer honest. Pa says the crick's dry clear to town, the boy said. Says he ain't never seen it like this. Says Hale's the only one with water worth a spit on account of the river bottom. He grunted, pulling. Everybody's driving stock down to Hale's river now. He's charging 'em to water. 2 bits a head. Clara's hands went still on the rope. He's charging people to water their cattle. Yes'm. Pa says it's robbery. Pa says he'll see Hale in. The boy caught himself someplace hot before he pays 2 bits a head. Tommy hauled the bucket up over the lip. But then his cows'll die. So. That was the whole shape of it, in one small word out of a boy's mouth. So. That was how a man like Victor Hale won not with cruelty you could point at, but with a river and a dry summer, and the word so hanging over every rancher's head like a raised hand. Pay me, or watch them die. So, he owns the water, Clara said slowly. So he owns the men, and he owns the men. So come the vote, or the county board, or whatever he wants next, he owns that too. She set the bucket down. That's a whole world he's built, Tommy, and it all runs on everybody else being thirsty. The boy looked up at her. You got water, though. You got the well. I got the well. Clara agreed, and she thought, but did not say for now. She thought about how thin the rope played out each morning before the splash. And she thought about how a well is just a hole to the same water table, a river feeds. And she thought about a man who charged 2 bits a head, and could not abide a widow who said no. And a very cold idea moved through her that she pushed down hard, and did not look at again that day. She should have looked at it. It came for her 10 days later, and it came the way she'd feared, which is to say, it came quiet without a face on it that she could accuse. She went to the well before dawn and dropped the bucket, and it fell, and there was no splash. The rope went slack in her hands. She hauled it up, hand over hand, faster and faster, her breath coming short, and the bucket came up over the lip bone dry, not a cup, not a swallow. Dry as the road that near killed her calf. Clara stood there in the dark with a dry bucket in her hands. "No," she said, just the one word out loud to the well, to the dark, to God. "No, no, you don't. You do not get to do this to me." She got the lantern. She got down on her belly at the wellhead and held the light down into the shaft, and she saw the water table gone, the mud at the bottom already crusting, and she saw something else. She saw, far down, half sunk in the drying muck, the pale shapes of stones that had no business being there. Flat creek stones. A whole slide of them dumped down her well in the dark to choke the vein and hurry along what the drought had started. She lay there a long time, the lantern hot in her hand, understanding it. "You couldn't wait," she whispered down the shaft, as if Hale could hear her at the bottom of it. "The drought was doing your work for you, but you couldn't wait. You had to make sure." She pulled the lantern up. Her face when she stood had gone still and hard in a way that would have frightened the men in the auction yard. If they'd seen it, would have wiped the laughter clean off them. "You're afraid of me, Victor Hale," she said to the dark. "I don't rightly know why yet. But a man doesn't poison a widow's well over pride. A man does that over fear." She could not prove it. She knew she could not prove it the same as she couldn't prove the fences. And she knew what the sheriff would say, that the drought dropped the table, that stones slide, that a grieving woman sees enemies in every shadow. She knew all that. She also knew dead certain in the place where a person knows the true things that Victor Hale had just tried to kill everything she loved by killing her water, and had done it clever enough that the law would call it weather. So she did the only thing left to a woman with a dead well, a dying garden, a banknote, and a calf. She went to Henrik. "You will bring him here," the old Dane said. He didn't hesitate. He didn't so much as blink at it. "The calf, your things, you will bring them here." "Henrik, I can't. You will not sleep 4 miles from a poisoned well, and a man who poisons wells," Henrik said, and there was iron in it she'd never heard from him before, the iron of a man who'd decided a thing and would not be moved. "My well is deep. My wife's people dug it 40 years ago, and it has never failed, not in the worst year my father saw. You will water your calf from it. You will keep your independence." "Ms. Whitmore, I know how you love it. You will pay me back in work and eggs, in whatever pleases your pride. But you will not stay out there alone to be finished off in the dark." Clara's eyes stung. She hadn't cried in front of a living soul in 11 months. She didn't cry now, but it was a near thing, and Henrik saw it, and he had the decency to turn away and busy his big hands with his hat. "Why?" she said. "Why would you do this? It'll put you crossways of Hale, same as me. He'll turn on you. You'll get your fences cut and your well—" She stopped, couldn't say it. "Let him," Henrik said. He turned back around and his weathered face had gone strange and soft. "You want to know the true reason, Ms. Whitmore, I will tell you the true reason, and then we will not speak of it again." He drew a slow breath. "When my Anna was dying in the summer in the heat like this, the neighbors came. I told you this, but I did not tell you all of it." His voice roughened. "One neighbor did not come. Hale. His land touches mine on the north. Anna baked for his men for years at branding at Roundup when he was short of hands. Years. And when she was dying, I sent his foreman a word asking only was there a man to spare, one man one day to help me bring in hay so I could sit with her at the end instead of breaking my back in the field." He stopped. "Hale sent back that he was short-handed, that was all. Short-handed. And Anna died while I was in the field bringing in hay because I could not be in 2 places and I was not beside her." His hands had closed into fists the size of hams. "So do not ask me why I will cross Victor Hale for a widow and a calf. Ask me why I ever waited this long." The two of them stood in the yard a long moment, the old widower and the young widow, And neither of them said anything, because there wasn't anything that needed saying. "All right," Clara said, finally thick. "All right, Henrik, I'll bring him. And I'll pay you back if it takes me the rest of my natural life." "You will pay me back," Henrik said, "by beating that man. That is the payment I want." A ghost of a smile crossed his hard face. "Now, let us go get your contrary calf before Hale thinks of the well I have not thought to guard." So Dusty came to live at the Sorensen place, and something Clara did not expect happened when he did. He got better, faster, stronger. As if the deep, clean water and the good old hay and the mere fact of not being alone against the whole valley did for the calf, what it also quietly did for the woman. Within 2 weeks, he'd put on a hand of height and a hardness of muscle that made Henrik stop what he was doing one evening and lean on the rail and look at the animal for a long, long time, with an expression on his face that Clara had never seen there. "What?" she said. "You're looking at him like he grew a second head." "Come here," Henrik said quietly. "Look with me. Look at his front, the set of his shoulder here. And the top line, you see how flat, how strong across the back, and the depth of him through the girth here where the heart and lungs live." He was almost whispering. "A scrub calf does not carry itself like this, Ms. Whitmore. A scrub calf is put together like a fence somebody built drunk. This one," he shook his head, "this one is put together like something a man bred for on purpose, for 100 years on purpose." Clara looked, and she tried to see what he saw, and she saw a calf. A good-looking calf she'd grant one that had come further than anybody thought possible. But a calf. "Henrik. He came out of the mercy pen. His mama died of the fever in the Barm herd. He's a fever orphan nobody wanted. There's no purpose in him. There's just luck and your hay and me being too stubborn to let him die." Henrik didn't answer right away. He was still looking at the calf, and now there was something working behind his eyes, some memory trying to surface. "The fever," he said slowly. "In the Bar M herd. This spring." "That's right." "Ms. Whitmore." He turned to her, and his voice had gone very careful. "Do you know where Hale got his breeding stock? The good stock, the deep stock, not the range scrubs. Do you know?" "No. How would I know a thing like that?" "I know it," Henrik said, "because I was there at the sale 3 years back when he bought them. He went east for them, Kentucky. He paid more than any man in this territory ever paid for cattle, and he came back proud as Lucifer, and he told anyone who would stand still to listen that he had bought the Kingman line." Henrik said the name like it meant something. "The Kingman line, Ms. Whitmore. There is not a stockman between here and the Mississippi who does not know that name. Grand Champions. Bulls that threw Grand Champions, and those bulls threw more. It is the best blood in the whole country, and Hale had it in his herd on the river bottom." He turned back to Dusty. "And this spring, the fever came into that herd, and Hale panicked, because a fever in your breeding stock is ruin. It can take everything, and a frightened rich man does what frightened rich men do." He culled. He sold off everything, that so much as coughed, sold it cheap and fast to save the rest, before anyone could see how deep the sickness ran and drive down the price of what was left. The blood had gone cold in Clara's veins. She was starting to see it now. She didn't want to see it, and she couldn't stop. "The mercy pen," she whispered. "The mercy pen." Henrik agreed, soft as a man in church. "Where Hale's frightened, hurried men through the culls. The sick, the weak, the orphans of the dead. And where a proud man, too busy counting real money, did not stop to look one single time at what he was throwing away." Clara put her hand out and gripped the rail. Dusty, hearing them, ambled over and put his broad, flat forehead against her palm the way he'd taken to doing, and she stood there with her hand on the head of a calf and her heart going like a scared drum. "You're telling me," she said, and had to stop and start again. "You're telling me this isn't a scrub. You're telling me his mama was a Kingman cow, that this—" She couldn't finish it. "I am telling you," Henrik said, "that I have raised cattle 60 years, boy and man, in the old country and the new, and I have never once been wrong about the set of a shoulder. And I am telling you that a fever orphan calf that survives what killed his own mother, and that then survives a road and a poisoned well, and a whole county laughing, a calf like that does not carry the best blood in America by accident. He put his own weathered hand next to hers on the calf's head. Victor Hale threw a fortune into the mercy pen to save himself from a fever, and a broke widow with $25 in a coffee tin walked up and bought it. And she named it after the road, and she does not even know yet what she has got. $25, Clara said. It came out of her as barely a breath. I paid $25 for the Kingman line. You paid $25, Henrik said, for the thing Victor Hale wants back so bad, he would poison your well to drive you off it before you figured out what you were standing on. He looked at her level and grave. Now you know why he offered $200 for 40 acres of dirt. He was not buying the dirt, Ms. Whitmore. He was buying back the calf and hoping to God you were too poor and too tired to ask why. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat up in the little room Henrik had given her with the lamp turned low, turning the whole thing over and over, the way the old Dane had taught her to turn a thing over looking for the underside. Because it changed everything, and it changed nothing. It changed everything, because a dust-colored calf out in the borrowed pen was no longer a stubborn charity case she'd saved out of grief and recognition. He was the best blood in the country. He was, if Henrik was right, and Henrik was never wrong about the set of a shoulder, a fortune on 4 legs, a bloodline, men would cross the territory to breed to the kind of animal that made a small ranch into a dynasty. And it changed nothing, because she was still a broke widow with a dead well, and a banknote coming due in the fall, and knowing what she had did her no good at all if Hale took the land out from under her before that calf was old enough to prove a single thing to anybody. I got a fortune, she said to the low lamp, and I can't eat it, and I can't spend it, and it don't come due for 2-3 years, and my note comes due in 8 weeks. She rubbed her face. It's the $25 all over again. It's worth everything, and it's worth nothing, all at the same time, and the only difference is, I'm the only one who knows. Then she went still. Because that wasn't quite true, was it? She wasn't the only one who knew. Hale knew. That was the whole thing. The thing that had been staring at her since the gate, since Rennick and the folded paper, and the $200. Hale knew what was in that mercy pen. Maybe not at the auction. At the auction, he'd been too proud to look, and that was going to be the great mistake of his life. And she prayed it would be. But sometime after. Sometime he'd done the same arithmetic Henrik had done, or one of his hands had recognized the calf, and he'd realized what had walked out of that yard behind a widow he'd written off, and the poison in the well, and the fences, and the $200. That was a man scrambling. That was a man trying to get back the thing he'd thrown away before the thing could grow up and stand next to his champion stallion at the county fair and show every rancher in 3 counties exactly what Victor Hale was too proud to see. Clara Whitmore began very slowly to smile. It was not a nice smile. It was not a smile the church women would have recognized on the widow they pitied. You need him gone before he grows up, she said to the empty room. That's it. That's the whole clock you're running against. You don't need me gone by fall because of some proud grudge. You need me gone by fall because if I'm still standing come next fair and that calf is standing beside me. She laughed low. You're not the cattle king anymore, are you, Victor? You're the man who sold the Kingman line to the mercy pen for $2 a head because you lost your nerve over a fever. And everybody'll know it. Everybody. She blew out the lamp. But she did not sleep even then because a cold, clear part of her, the part that had learned in 11 hard months that certainty was a luxury, for people with choices, spoke up in the dark and said, and what will a frightened man do when he realizes poisoning the well wasn't enough? What will Victor Hale do when he understands that you've figured out what you have? She lay in the dark and did not have an answer. And that was the worst part, and she carried it into a thin gray sleep just as the birds started up. The answer came 3 days later, and it did not come from Hale. It came from Tommy Lane, who came pounding up the Sorensen Lane on his pa's mule at a dead run, hollering before he was even off it, his voice cracking high with a boy's fear. Ms. Whitmore, you got to come. There's men. There's men at the auction talking about your calf, they're saying." Clara came out fast, wiping her hands. "Slow down. Slow it down, Tommy. What men?" The boy slid off the mule out of breath, wild-eyed. "Cattlemen. From off. Two of 'em strangers come in on the morning stage, and they're asking all over town about a fever orphan calf out of the Bar M herd dust-colored sold cheap this spring. And Hollis at the mercantile, he told 'em it was you that bought it and where you was at, and—" The boy gulped air. "And Ms. Whitmore, one of 'em said a name. I heard it. I was right there getting Pa's tobacco. He said, were they sure the cull calves come out of the Kingman cows? And Hollis said he didn't know nothing about no Kingman. And the man he got real quiet, and he said to the other one, he said, if Hale culled Kingman blood into a public auction, that's the biggest mistake any stockman ever made in this territory. And there's a fortune sitting in a widow's barn that don't know it's a fortune." Clara stood very still. So it was out. Whatever thin secret advantage she'd had, the one thing she knew that only Hale otherwise knew, it was out loose in the world, riding the morning stage, and standing at Hollis's counter, and spreading through the valley like the fever itself. Strangers knew. The town would know by supper. And that meant, "Tommy," she said, and she was surprised how calm she sounded, because inside her everything had started moving very fast. "These men, did they say what they wanted? Did they want to buy him?" "I don't know, ma'am. I lit out to warn you soon as I heard your name." The boy's chin was trembling. "But Ms. Whitmore, if they know then Mr. Hale, he's gonna—" "He already knows," Clara said. "He's known a while. He's the one who called them." Her mind was racing ahead now down every fork of the road at once. Strangers who knew what she had. A town that would know by supper. And Victor Hale, who had already tried the quiet things, the fences, the $200, the poisoned well. And who now had run clean out of quiet because the secret he'd been racing to bury before the fair had just walked off the morning stage and started saying his shame out loud at the mercantile counter. She thought about what Henrik had said. What will a frightened man do when he realizes the quiet things weren't enough? And she knew, standing there in Henrik's yard with a shaking boy in front of her and a fortune on 4 legs in the pen behind her, that whatever Victor Hale was going to do next, he was going to do it soon, and he was not going to do it quiet, because he had run out of time to be quiet in. "Henrik!" she called, and her voice carried across the yard sharp enough that the old Dane came out of the barn at a pace she'd never seen him move. "Henrik, we got trouble coming, and it's coming fast." He took one look at her face and set down the tools in his hands. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it quick: the strangers, the stage, the name spoken out loud at the counter, the town that would know by dark. And as she talked, she watched the old man's face change, watched the weathered calm on it go tight and grim, watched him glance once toward the pen, where a dust-colored calf stood in the good clean watergrass, and watched them both with his patient, ready, wary eyes. "Then we do not have weeks," Henrik said when she'd finished. "I thought we had weeks. Until the fair, at least. I thought we had until he could stand beside Hale's stallion and settle it in front of everyone." He shook his head slowly. "But a secret that is out is a different animal from a secret that is kept. Now Hale knows, the whole valley will know. Now Hale is not racing to hide his mistake. Now Hale is racing to make his mistake disappear." Clara felt the cold go all the way down. "You mean the calf?" "I mean the calf." Henrik's jaw was set like stone. A man cannot unsell what he sold. He cannot make the town unhear what they will hear tonight. There is only one way left for Victor Hale to make sure that no fever orphan calf ever stands beside his champion at any fair and shows the world what he threw away. He looked at her, and there was no comfort in his face, only truth. The truth she'd asked him for once, and gotten, and never forgotten. He has to make sure the calf is not there to stand. The two of them turned together and looked at the pen. Dusty looked back at them, ears forward, alert the way he always was, the way the hard road had taught him to be, watching everything missing. Nothing a lean, dust-colored calf that had already survived the fever that killed his mother, and a road that near finished him, and a poisoned well, and a whole county's laughter, and that did not yet know that the most dangerous man in 3 counties had just run out of quiet ways to be rid of him. "Tommy," Clara said softly, not taking her eyes off the calf. "Ride home. Tell your pa to keep you home tonight and tomorrow, and don't you come back here till I send for you. You hear me? This isn't a boy's fight anymore." "But Ms. Whitmore—" "You heard the lady," Henrik said gently. For the old man could be gentle even now. "Go, son. Go on." The boy went white-faced, casting one look back over his shoulder at the calf. And then the mule carried him off down the lane and out of sight, and the widow and the widower stood alone in the yard in the killing heat of that long summer, with a fortune between them and a frightened, cornered, dangerous man somewhere out past the river, deciding right that very minute what he was willing to do to make his greatest mistake disappear before the whole valley could see it standing on 4 good legs in the light. "We watch him tonight," Henrik said. "You and me, we do not sleep, not tonight." "No," Clara agreed. Her hand found the rail, gripped it. "Not tonight." And Dusty, as if he understood every word, lifted his head and looked past them both down the long, empty lane toward the river, and went very, very still. They did not sleep. They took turns at it the way soldiers do. Henrik on the barn side with an old shotgun across his knees, Clara at the pen with Samuel's rifle, the one she'd kept oiled and loaded these 11 months and never once fired at a living thing. They passed the black hours in a silence, broken only by the calf shifting in his straw and the far-off yip of coyotes, and every hour or so, one of them would murmur a word to the other, just to be sure the other was still awake, still watching. Nothing came the first night. Nothing came, and that was almost worse, because a thing you can see coming is a thing you can meet, and a thing that stays out past the edge of the lantern light and lets you wear yourself thin, waiting for it. That thing has already got a piece of you before it ever arrives. "He is not coming tonight," Henrik said at last when the sky went from black to bruised gray. "He wants us tired. He wants us to do exactly this 3 nights for, until we cannot keep our eyes open, and then he comes on the night we finally sleep." The old Dane rubbed his face with a big weathered hand. "It is what I would do, if I were a coward with money and men." "Then we don't sleep," Clara said. "Then we do not sleep the way he wants us to." Henrik stood joints cracking. "We sleep in the day in turns. We hire eyes. There is a boy." "No boys," Clara said sharp. "I sent Tommy home. I won't put a child in front of this. Not Tommy." Henrik shook his head. "A man. Older. There is a fellow I know worked the roundups hard up now, honest as the day. He will sit a night watch for $1 and say nothing to nobody. And there is—" He hesitated. "There is the law, Ms. Whitmore. There is the sheriff." Clara laughed short and bitter. "The sheriff, who Hale bought same as the bank. Maybe." Henrik's face was hard to read in the gray light. "Or maybe not bought. Maybe only tired. Maybe only a man who has learned it is easier to look at his boots when Hale walks by. There is a difference between a bought man and a coward, Ms. Whitmore, and sometimes you can turn the coward if you give him a thing he cannot look away from." He picked up the shotgun. "But not yet. Not with nothing but a widow's suspicion and a fever calf. He will call it grief seeing enemies in the dark, same as he would have called the well. First we live. First we keep that animal breathing. Then we find our proof." The proof, when it came from the strangers. They rode out to the Sorensen place the next afternoon, the 2 men off the morning stage, and Clara watched them come up the lane with her heart going, and Samuel's rifle leaned just inside the door where she could reach it. But they came slow and open-handed, and the older of the 2 took off his hat before he was even off his horse, which told her something. "Ma'am?" He was a broad, gray-mustached man with kind, tired eyes, and the sun-cracked hands of somebody who'd worked cattle his whole life, not just owned them. "Name's Josiah Pruitt. This here's my associate, Mr. Ames. We come from the Kingman Stock Company out of Kentucky, and we have ridden a long way on the strength of a rumor, and I'll not waste your time pretending otherwise." Clara did not ask them in, not yet. "I heard there were men asking after my calf. That'd be us." Pruitt turned his hat in his hands. "May I speak plain, Ms. Whitmore? I'm too old and too dusty for the other kind of talking." "I'd prefer it." "Then here it is." He drew a breath. 3 years back, Victor Hale bought 11 head off the Kingman Company. Prime breeding stock. Our best. He paid dear for 'em, and we thought no more about it. A sale's a sale. But we keep records, ma'am, careful ones, on every animal that carries our blood, because that blood is the whole of what we are. He glanced at his associate. This spring word reached us that a fever went through Hale's herd. That happens. Grieved us, but it happens. What did not sit right, his jaw tightened, was word that came after. That Hale had panicked. That he'd dumped stock into a public county auction cheap and fast to save his own reputation and drive the fever scare off before it wrecked his prices. And ma'am, when a man panics with our blood in his barn, he does not stop to sort the Kingman cow's orphans from the range scrubs. He shovels them all into the mercy pen together and rides off counting what's left. "So you came," Clara said slowly, "to find out if he'd thrown your blood in the dirt." "We came," said Pruitt, "to find out if it was true that a fever orphan calf out of a Kingman cow got sold to a widow for pocket money, while Victor Hale looked the other way. Because if it's true—" He stopped, and for the first time, something like feeling broke through the tired kindness of his face. "If it's true, then the finest bloodline this country has produced in 40 years is standing in your barn, ma'am, and it does not belong to Victor Hale, and it never did once that gavel came down, and there is not one blessed thing he can do about it but weep." The silence stretched. "Would you look at him," Clara said at last, "and tell me true? Not what I want to hear. True." "Ma'am," said Josiah Pruitt quietly, "there is nothing on this earth I came further to do." She took them to the pen, and she watched Josiah Pruitt's face as he laid eyes on Dusty. For the first time, watched the tired old cattleman go, very still. Watched him lean slow on the rail and look and look and look at the shoulder, at the top line, at the depth through the girth. All the things Henrik had shown her. And she watched a wetness come up in the old man's eyes that he did not bother to hide, and she knew the answer before he spoke it. "Ames," Pruitt said hoarse, not turning around. Come look at what that man threw away." He put his weathered hand out over the rail, slow and Dusty contrary. Wary Dusty, who let no stranger near him, walked up and put his broad forehead against it, gentle as a lamb, as if he knew. "Hello," Pruitt whispered to the calf. "Hello, you. We've been looking for you. Lord above, but we've been looking for you." He turned to Clara, and his eyes were streaming, and he did not care. $25, he said. "That's the number I heard. Is it true?" "It's true. Ms. Whitmore." Josiah Pruitt took off his hat again, and this time it was not manners. It was something closer to reverence. "You paid $25 for the best young bull that will stand in this territory in our lifetimes. And you saved him from a road and a dry well and God knows what all, because I have heard those stories too riding in. And I want you to hear me say, in front of witnesses, that whatever Victor Hale believes he is owed nothing. That animal is yours, bought fair at public auction before the whole county. Yours." Get-a-ta. That should have been the end of the fear. It was instead the start of the worst of it, because Josiah Pruitt had said the one word that changed the whole shape of the danger. Witnesses. Clara understood it before the old cattleman had finished speaking, and she saw Henrik understand it too, saw the old Dane's face go pale under its weathering. Because up until now, the calf's worth had been a secret thing, a rumor, a suspicion. Now there were 2 respected men from the Kingman Company, standing in the flesh, who could swear in a courtroom before God and the county that the animal in the widow's barn was Kingman blood, sold fair at public auction. Now Clara's claim wasn't a grieving woman's fancy. Now it was a fact with 2 mustached witnesses on horseback, and that meant Victor Hale's problem had just gotten immeasurably worse. Because a calf you can steal in the night. A calf you can poison, or drive off a cliff, or simply make disappear. But a fact sworn to by outside men of standing that you cannot unsay. That will follow you. Mr. Pruitt, Clara said, and her voice had gone tight. "Where are you gentlemen staying tonight?" "The hotel in town, ma'am." "Why?" "Because Victor Hale knows who you are by now, same as he knew who I was inside a day. And you have just made yourselves the two most dangerous men in this valley to him. You can prove what he did. And a man who'd poison a widow's well—" She stopped, seeing the alarm dawn on Pruitt's face. "That man is not going to let two witnesses ride comfortable back to Kentucky and tell the Kingman Company what became of their blood." Josiah Pruitt was old, but he was not slow. He looked at his associate, and the color went out of both their faces together. "You reckon he'd—" "I reckon," Clara said, "that you should not sleep in that hotel tonight. I reckon you should not ride the stage road alone. And I reckon the four of us and one calf are now the only thing standing between Victor Hale and the biggest disgrace of his life, and he has already shown me exactly how far he'll go to make an inconvenient thing disappear." Vague. They moved that night. Not the calf moving. The calf was the thing Hale expected, the thing he was watching for. They moved the witnesses. Henrik took Pruitt and Ames out the back of his land on foot in the dark, along an old cattle trail his wife's people had used 40 years before, to a line shack 2 miles off that nobody used and nobody knew. And he left them there with water and hardtack, and Pruitt's own pistol, and he told them plain, "Do not light a fire. Do not walk the road. Do not trust any rider who is not me or the widow. And wait. You are asking us to hide like criminals." Ames said, young and stung, "when we have done nothing but tell the truth." "I am asking you," Henrik said, "to be alive to tell it in a courtroom instead of dead in a ditch that the sheriff will call an accident. You may choose the dignified way or the living way, Mr. Ames. In my experience, a man cannot always have both." He set the water down. "Wait for us." And they waited. And back at the Sorensen place, Clara sat the night watch alone while Henrik was gone, Samuel's rifle across her knees, and she thought about the shape of what was coming, and for the first time she let herself think it all the way through to the end, because Hale could not win now. Not clean. That was the thing she kept circling back to. Even if he killed the calf, there were witnesses to swear what the calf had been, and how it came to be hers. Even if he ran her off the land, the Kingman Company knew now, and would come asking, and the story would out. Every quiet path to victory was closed to Victor Hale. She had, without ever meaning to, boxed him into a corner where the only moves left were loud ones, ugly ones, moves that would ruin him, even in winning. And that was exactly what made him most dangerous. A man with something left to protect is careful. A man who has already lost everything, but does not know how to stop fighting that man, will burn the whole valley down around him, just so no one can say he lost. "He's going to come at all of it," she said aloud to the dark, to Samuel. "Not just the calf, me, the land, the old man. He's going to try to take it all at once in one blow before the fair, before the Kingman men can talk, before the town can turn. He's got to." She gripped the rifle. "The only question is how." The answer came at moonset, and it did not come as violence. It came as fire. She smelled it before she saw it smoke on the dry night wind, sharp and wrong, and she was on her feet with the rifle before she'd thought about being on her feet, and she turned toward the smell and away to the west, out past the river, out where the Bar M's fences ran up against the dry range grass. She saw the orange line crawling along the black horizon. Grass fire. In a summer like this one, with the range gone to wire and the wind up, a grass fire was the end of everything. It would run. It would run faster than a horse, faster than a man could think, and it would eat every dry acre between where it started and the river, and everything on those acres. Cattle fences, barns, houses, the old line shack where two Kingman men waited in the dark, all of it in the path of a wall of flame that a frightened man had set to burn his own troubles to ash. "No," Clara breathed, and then louder, screaming it into the empty yard, "No!" Because she understood in the space of one heartbeat the whole terrible genius of it. A fire was weather. A fire in a drought was an act of God, same as a slid well or a dry creek. No man could be blamed for a grass fire in the worst summer in memory. and a grass fire could do everything. Hail needed doing all at once. It could kill a calf and burn out a widow and reach a line shack where two inconvenient witnesses were hiding and leave behind nothing but ash and the shrug of a hard land in a hard year. It could erase every single thing that threatened him, and there would be nobody left to swear it was anything but bad luck. And Henrik was out there. Henrik was out there in the dark on the old trail between the line shack and the fire. Clara's whole body wanted to run 3 directions at once, to the pen, for the calf, to the trail, for Henrik, to the shack, for the witnesses. And she stood frozen for one endless second, understanding that she could not save them all, that the fire had been set precisely, so that she could not save them all, that this was the corner Hale had built for her, the same way he'd built one for himself, and that whatever she chose to run for, she was choosing what to let burn. Then she chose. She chose the calf because the calf could not run, and because the calf was the whole reason for all of it, and because some cold, clear part of her that had learned to survive on a county road knew that if she lost the calf, she lost everything, and if she saved the calf, she still had a fighting chance to save the rest. She threw open the pen. Dusty was already up, already. Wild-eyed, already screaming that high, terrified horse scream at the smell of the smoke, and Clara got a rope on him, with hands that shook so bad she near couldn't tie it, and she hauled him out of the pen and away from the barn and the fire north away toward the one thing in that whole burning valley she knew for certain would not catch the river. "Come on," she sobbed, hauling the terrified calf down the north slope, the fire's glow throwing both their shadows huge and leaping ahead of them. "Come on, you contrary, stubborn, beautiful thing, you did not survive all of this to burn, come on." And behind her out on the black range the fire found the wind and stood up and began to run. She got the calf to the river. She got him down the cut bank and into the shallows up to his knees in the low brown water, the one place the fire could not follow, and she stood beside him in the current with her arm over his neck and her own legs shaking, and she watched the whole horizon behind her turn to a wall of orange that lit the underside of the smoke like the roof of hell, and she screamed Henrik's name into it until her voice broke. "Henrik! Henrik! Answer me!" Nothing. Only the roar of it, the great living roar of a grass fire eating a valley, a sound she'd never heard before and would hear in her sleep for the rest of her days. She didn't know how long she stood there, long enough that the fire reached the edge of Henrik's cut hayfields, and she saw it happen, saw it with her own eyes, and did not believe it began to gutter and slow. Because Henrik had cut those fields short. Henrik, the careful old Dane, had mown his hay low and clean weeks ago, and green stubble does not burn like standing wire grass, and the fire that had run a mile in minutes came up against 200 acres of close-cut Sorensen field, and faltered and dropped and could not leap the gap. The fire that Victor Hale had set to burn out the widow died in the fields of the old man he'd let grieve alone. But Henrik was still out there, and the shack was on the far side of the burn. "Please," Clara said to God, to Samuel, to Anna Sorensen, wherever she was, to anyone. "Please, not him. He came out for me. Please, not him." And then out of the smoke staggering black with soot, and half his beard singed away, and one arm hanging wrong but walking on his own 2 feet, came Henrik Sorensen, and behind him, coughing and stumbling and alive, came Josiah Pruitt and young Ames, the 2 Kingman men dragged out of the path of the fire by an old widower who had known these hills 40 years, and had known the moment he smelled smoke exactly which way death would come and exactly which trail would carry him around it. Clara ran to him. She left the calf in the river and ran, and she caught the old man as his legs finally gave, and the 2 of them went down together in the mud at the river's edge, and she held him, and he was shaking, and she was shaking, and neither of them could speak for a while. The shack. Henrik got out at last, horse ruined. "I got them out of the shack. When I smelled it, I knew what it was for. I knew he would send it for the shack." He coughed deep and wet. "The calf. In the river. He's safe. He's safe. Henrik, you're all safe. It's the fire's dying. Your fields killed it. Your fields." "Anna's fields," Henrik whispered. "She always said, cut it low, cut it early. Do not be lazy." Anna always said. And then the old man put his ruined face against Clara's shoulder and wept for his wife, for the fields, for the long, terrible night. And Clara held him in the mud and wept with him. And above them the smoke rolled and thinned, and the great orange wall guttered down to a smolder, and did not cross the river, and did not reach the calf, and did not in the end erase a single one of the things Victor Hale had sent it to erase. He had burned his own range to the ground, and killed nothing. They found the proof in the morning. Not proof of the fever calf, they had Pruitt and Ames for that now alive and sworn. Proof of the fire. Because a man who sets a grass fire in the dark is careful, but a man who sets one in a panic in a hurry. Before the fair, before the witnesses can talk, that man gets sloppy. And when the sheriff finally came riding out at mid-morning, drawn by the smoke, like every other soul in the valley, it was Clara Whitmore who walked him out to the fire's origin point, on the Bar M's own western fence line, and showed him what she'd found there at first light, a coal oil can. Empty. And boot prints, many of them coming up to the fence and setting the fire and running back, and among them pressed clear in the soft ash-dusted ground, one set of prints from a fine-tooled boot heel with a distinctive broken corner. The kind of boot no cowhand could afford, the kind of boot worn by exactly one man in that valley. "That's Rennick's heel," said the sheriff, slowly crouched over the print. He was a heavy-set man named Del Corbin, and he'd spent a good many years looking at his boots when Hale walked by, and Clara watched him crouched there in the ash and saw the war going on behind his tired face. Cole Rennick, Hale's foreman. "On the Bar M's own fence," Clara said quietly, "setting a fire that ran toward my calf and my land, and a line shack where 2 men from the Kingman Stock Company were hiding for their lives, because they can prove what Victor Hale did." She let it sit. "You can look at your boots on this one too, Sheriff Corbin, if you've a mind to. Lord knows you've had the practice. Or you can look at that heel print and those 2 witnesses at my place breathing soot and that dead range as far as you can see, and you can be for once the law." She wasn't cruel about it. She was too tired for cruel. She only said it true. "It's a hard thing to stop being afraid of a man. I know it better than anybody in this county. But there's a widower back at that river with a broke arm who ran into a fire for strangers last night, and there's a calf that survived what Victor Hale threw at it 3 separate times. And I'm asking you, Del, which of us are you? The man who set this, or the men who lived through it?" Sheriff Del Corbin knelt in the ash a long, long time. Then he took out his handkerchief, and he laid it careful over the boot print to keep the wind from taking it, and he weighted the corners with stones, and he stood up, and something in his face had changed. Some long-carried weight had shifted and set down. "I'm going to need those 2 Kingman men to come make statements," he said. "And you, and Sorensen, if his arm'll let him." He looked west over the ruined smoking range. "And I'm going to need to ride out to the Bar M and have a conversation with Cole Rennick about where he was last night before Hale can get to him and put a story in his mouth." He settled his hat. "A foreman'll set a fire for $1, and his job, Ms. Whitmore. But a foreman'll swear against his boss too when he's looking at a rope and the boss is looking at a lawyer. Rennick's the crack in the wall. I've seen it 100 times." He mounted up. "Get your people to town. All of them. And keep that calf where I can put a man on it, because Victor Hale is going to wake up this morning and learn his fire killed nothing and left a boot print. And I have known that man 20 years, and I am telling you, he's going to do something desperate," Clara said. "He's going to do something desperate," the sheriff agreed grimly. "And this time, God help him, I'm going to be standing there when he does." He rode for the Bar M, and Clara Whitmore walked back down to the river, where an old Dane sat wrapped in a blanket with his broken arm splinted, and 2 Kingman men beside him, and a dust-colored calf standing knee-deep in the current, alive unburned, watching her come with his patient, ready eyes, and she stood among the ruin of everything, and the survival of the only things that mattered, and she understood that Victor Hale had just made his last and greatest mistake, the same mistake he'd made in the auction yard the very first day. He had thrown fire at the one animal in all the world that had already learned down in its bones on a dusty road, when it was small and dying, exactly how to survive the very worst the world could send, and had come out the other side, still standing. Sheriff Del Corbin did not get to Cole Rennick in time. He rode into the Bar M yard a little after noon to find the foreman already gone horse saddle bedroll and a week's wages out of the strongbox, gone north toward the territory line, where no county badge could follow. And Corbin, sitting his horse in that swept clean yard, understood what it meant, and it turned his stomach, because a foreman who runs is a foreman who was told to run, and a man who tells his foreman to run is a man who has decided he no longer needs a witness that can be questioned. He paid him off. Corbin said back in town, in the little jail office where Clara and Henrik and the two Kingman men had come to give their statements. He said it heavy. Or scared him off. Either way, my crack in the wall just rode out of my county, and I got a boot print under a handkerchief and nothing to hang it on but a heel with a broke corner that Hale'll swear got sold or stole or lost. He rubbed his eyes. I'm sorry, I truly am. I finally got up the sand to go after him, and he was already 3 moves ahead. He's always 3 moves ahead, Clara said. But she said it thoughtful, not defeated, turning it over the way Henrik had taught her. He's been 3 moves ahead since the auction yard. Fences the well, the $200 the fire. Every one of them clever. Every one of them deniable. She looked up. And every single one of them failed. They failed. Henrik agreed, his splinted arm cradled against his chest. Because he is fighting the wrong fight. He keeps trying to make the calf disappear, and the calf will not disappear. So now, the old Dane's eyes were sharp above his singed beard. Now he has 1 move left that is not disappearing the calf. He has beating it. The room went quiet. The fair, said Josiah Pruitt slowly. The fair, Henrik said. It is in 11 days. Every rancher in 3 counties will be there. And Hale has spent 3 years telling every one of those men that his stock is the finest in the territory, the Kingman line he calls it, though he threw the best of it in the mercy pen and does not like to remember that part. His whole name, his whole standing rests on one thing, that he owns the best blood in the country, and everyone knows it. Henrik leaned forward. If that calf stands up at the fair and beats him, if the fever orphan he sold for pocket money outshows his champion in front of every man he has ever looked down on, then it does not matter what the sheriff can prove about a fire. Hale is finished, not in law, in the only court that matters to a man like that, the court of every eye in the valley. Clara felt it settle into place, the whole shape of the endgame cold and clear. So he can't let it get to the fair, she said. One way or the other. He kills it before, or he beats it there, but he cannot let it stand up beside his champion and win. She stood. Which means the next 11 days are the most dangerous of all of them. Because he's out of quiet moves, and he's out of deniable ones, and he's got a fire that failed, and a foreman that ran, and a whole valley starting to whisper, and a desperate man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous animal God ever made. More dangerous than a fever calf, said young Ames, trying for lightness. Nobody laughed. But Josiah Pruitt looked at the young man and then at Clara, and something firmed up in the old cattleman's weathered face. Ms. Whitmore, he said, I've been sitting here listening, and I've made up my mind about a thing, and I'd like to say it plain. He set his hat on his knee. You mean to run that calf at the fair, don't you? Against Hale's champion. Clara hadn't said it out loud. She hadn't even fully said it to herself. But she heard it now in Pruitt's mouth, and she knew it was true, had been true since the river, maybe since the auction yard. He's not old enough to show proper, she said. He's a yearling. Hale's champion's a full-grown stallion, trained, conditioned. I didn't ask if it was fair, Pruitt said. I asked if you meant to do it. I mean to do it. Then hear me. The old man leaned in. The Kingman Company will stand behind you. Not with charity. I've watched you enough to know you'd sooner starve than take charity. With what's ours to give. Ames and I will register that calf under the Kingman name, sworn, papered, legal, so that when he stands up at that fair, there is not one man alive who can call him a scrub. We will vouch his blood before the judges, and we will do it because, his voice thickened, because for 40 years the Kingman Company has bred the best blood in America, And never once, not one time, has that blood been carried through fire and drought and poison by a soul that deserved it more than you. You didn't buy a bull for $25, Ms. Whitmore. You bought the right to prove something, and by God we mean to help you prove it." Clara had to look away. She had not cried in front of anyone in 11 months, and she had come near it twice in as many weeks now, and she was not going to make it 3. "All right," she said, rough. "All right, Mr. Pruitt. Then we've got 11 days to keep him alive and get him ready, and Victor Hale's got 11 days to stop us." She looked around the little room, the tired sheriff, the burned old Dane, the 2 Kentucky men, and somewhere out past the walls, a calf standing in a borrowed pen with a deputy watching it. "Let's not waste any of them." They did not. They moved the calf into town, into the livery barn, behind the sheriff's office, where Corbin could put a man on it day and night, and where Hale could not send a rider through the dark without half of Main Street seeing. They put the word out quiet, and then not so quiet, that the Kingman Company had sent men to register the widow Whitmore's yearling for the fair, and Clara watched over those 11 days as the whisper she'd been drowning in for months began slowly to change its direction. It started with Tommy Lane's father. He came to the livery on the 3rd day. Ezra Lane, a hard, proud man who'd never said a kind word to Clara in his life, who'd called her a fool same as everybody. He stood in the barn door twisting his hat and looking at the calf, and finally he said, not to her exactly, "My boy always said that horse was smart, smarter than Hale's fancy stock." A pause. "I told him to hush, told him a scrub's a scrub." Another pause longer. "Reckon I owe the boy an apology, and, it clearly cost him, reckon I owe you one, ma'am, for the things I said, and the things I let others say without stopping 'em. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Lane. I do, though." He looked at her straight. "Hale charged me 2 bits a head to water my stock at that river all summer while my kids went thin. I paid it because I was scared of him same as everybody. And you," he shook his head, "you had less than any of us, and a dead husband, and a whole town laughing, and you didn't pay him 1 red cent of fear, not one." He set his hat back on. "Whatever you need these next days. My boy, my mule, my own 2 hands. You send for Ezra Lane. He was the first. He was not the last." They came 1 and 2 at a time, over those 11 days. Ranchers who'd paid Hale's water toll all summer. Homesteaders he'd squeezed, men and women who'd looked at their boots for years. The way the sheriff had. They came to the livery barn to look at the fever calf the widow had saved, and to say, most of them awkward, most of them ashamed, some version of the same thing. That they were sorry, that they'd been afraid, that they hoped come the fair that dust-colored yearling ran the legs off Victor Hale's champion and shamed the man clean out of the county. "You are becoming their courage," Henrik observed one evening, watching another rancher tip his hat to Clara on his way out of the barn. "You understand this. They could not stand up to him. So they are standing behind you instead. You are the thing they wish they had been." "That's a heavy thing to be," Clara said. "It is," Henrik agreed. "It is the heaviest thing there is, and you are carrying it the way you carried that calf up the road the first day." He smiled his singed smile, slow, and like a woman with somewhere to be. Hale came at them once more before the fair. Of course he did. But he came different this time, not with fire or poison in the dark, but in broad daylight, in a fine buggy with a lawyer beside him and a paper in his hand, right up to the front of the livery barn, where half the town could watch. And Clara understood, watching him step down in his gray hat and his tooled boots, that this was the desperate man's desperate move, the one Henrik had warned would come dressed up in respectability, because respectability was the last weapon he had left. "Ms. Whitmore." He tipped his hat, even now, even here, the courtesy cold as ever. "I've come to make peace." "Have you?" "I have." He gestured, and the lawyer stepped forward with the paper. "There's been a great deal of unpleasantness this summer. Fences are well terrible things, and I'll say plainly, I don't know who did them, but I grieve that they happened on my range's account." The lie was so smooth, she almost admired it. And that fire, a tragedy. I lost near 200 acres of my own grass to it, you'll recall. We're all of us victims of a hard year. He nodded at the paper. So I've come to end it. That's a bill of sale. I'll buy your yearling, the Kingman colt, since that's what the Kentucky men say he is, for $1,000. Cash. Today. The number went through the crowd like a wind through wheat. $1,000. It was a fortune past imagining, more than Clara's whole farm, more than she'd see in 10 years of scratching. She heard someone in the crowd gasp it out loud. $1,000, heard the disbelief in it. And she understood exactly what Hale was doing, and it was clever. It was the cleverest thing he'd done yet. Because if she took it, he had the calf, and the calf never ran at the fair, and his name was safe. And if she refused it, if she turned down $1,000 in front of the whole town, then he could turn to that crowd and spread his hands and say, You see how unreasonable I offered her a fortune, a life-changing fortune, and she threw it in my face out of pure spite. I have tried everything. The woman simply cannot be dealt with. He was not trying to buy the calf. He was trying to buy back the town's sympathy, to turn her from the widow they'd started to admire back into the fool they'd always thought she was. Clara looked at the paper. She looked at the $1,000 written on it in a lawyer's fine hand. And then she looked past Hale at the crowd at Ezra Lane, at the ranchers who'd come to apologize, at the homesteaders he'd bled all summer. All of them, watching, all of them holding their breath. And she understood that this was the real fight right here, not at the fair at all. This was the moment. Whatever she said next would decide which way the whole valley finally broke. Mr. Hale, she said, and she pitched her voice to carry clear and steady the way it had held in the auction yard when her hands were shaking. That's a generous offer. $1,000. More money than I've ever seen. She paused, let it hang. Can I ask you a question in front of all these good people before I answer? Hale's eyes narrowed, but he could not say no, not with the town watching, not without looking like he had something to hide. Ask. This spring, Clara said, when the fever came into your herd, you sold off stock, cheap, fast, into the public auction to save your prices. She kept her voice mild, almost kind. And that yearling in this barn, the one you're now offering me $1,000 for, he came out of that sale, out of the mercy pen, where you'd thrown him, for $2 a head. The crowd went very still. That's business, Hale said, but something had gone tight in his jaw. Every stockman culls when there's fever. There's no shame in— Oh, I'm not saying there's shame in culling, Clara said. There's no shame in that at all. A man's got to protect his herd, I understand it. She took a step toward him, and the crowd leaned in with her. But here's the part I want these folks to understand, Mr. Hale, so they can see just how generous your offer truly is. You're offering me $1,000 today for an animal you yourself threw in the mercy pen for $2 4 months ago. $1,000 for a calf you looked at with your own 2 eyes and decided was worthless. She let that land. So I've got to ask in front of everybody. What changed? What did you learn about that calf between $2 and $1,000 that's got you driving out here in your fine buggy with your lawyer to buy back a thing you threw away? Victor Hale did not answer. He could not answer. Because there was no answer he could give that did not damn him either. He'd known all along what he was throwing away, which made him a fool, or he'd learned it after and panicked, which made him worse. And either way, the number on that paper stopped being a generous offer and became a confession, a $1,000 confession that everything the widow said about him was true. I'll tell you what changed, Clara said quietly. And now she wasn't performing for the crowd anymore. Now she was just telling the truth the way she told it to Henrik at night. Nothing changed about the calf. He was worth everything the day you threw him in that pen, and he's worth everything now. The only thing that changed is that somebody was willing to see it. Somebody was willing to feed him and wash his wounds and carry him up a road when he couldn't walk and pull him out of a fire and wait, just wait and pay attention and believe there was something there worth believing in when every soul in this county said there wasn't. She looked around at them all, at every ashamed and hopeful face. That's the only difference between a $2 scrub and a $1,000 champion, Mr. Hale. Somebody who wouldn't quit on him. And I reckon that's a thing you can't buy at any price, because it was never for sale in the first place. The silence held one heartbeat. 2. Then Ezra Lane at the edge of the crowd said loud and clear, "No sale hail, ride on home." And another voice took it up. "No sale." And another, "No sale, Victor." Until it was half the crowd saying it, a low rolling wall of it, "No sale, no sale." Ride on the whole town that had spent all summer looking at its boots, standing up at last all together behind a widow and a calf. Victor Hale looked at them. For one moment Clara saw it, and never forgot it. For one moment the mask cracked, and what showed underneath was not anger. It was fear. The pure animal fear of a man who has just felt the ground he'd stood on his whole life move under his feet, who has just understood that the thing he built on everyone else being afraid does not work anymore because they have stopped being afraid all at once in front of him. He folded the paper. He put it away with hands that were not quite steady, and he climbed back into his buggy, and he took up the reins, and before he drove off, he looked down at Clara Whitmore one last time, and his voice, when it came, was low, and it had lost all its courtesy, all its cold, smooth manners, and what was left was naked. "You think you've won," he said. "No," Clara said. "I think you've lost. Those aren't the same thing. You taught me that first day in the yard. Remember? You told me I was a woman who'd decided to lose. Turns out you didn't know the first thing about losing Victor, but I believe you're fixing to learn." He drove off. The crowd let him go, and it did not cheer. It was too tired and too changed for cheering, but it stood there together in the street, and that standing together was louder than any cheer could have been. The last days before the fair, Clara worked the calf. Not to make him fast, she couldn't make a yearling into a race stallion in a week, and she knew it, and so did Pruitt. She worked him for the one thing he already had. The thing the hard road had bred into his bones, deeper than any Kentucky bloodline endurance. Stubbornness. The animal refusal to quit that had carried him off a dying road and out of a burning valley. "He'll not beat that stallion in a sprint," Pruitt said, watching Clara run the yearling on the long oval they'd marked out. "Hale's horse is a quarter-miler bred and trained for the burst. Over 4 furlongs he'll leave this colt standing." "Then we don't run him 4 furlongs, Clara said. "We run him long, endurance, distance, the kind of race a quarter-miler can't finish." She wiped sweat from her brow. "That's the thing about a fever calf, Mr. Pruitt. He was never built for the easy burst. He was built for the long haul when everything's gone dry and hard and the fast ones fall out. That's the only race he's ever run in his whole life. And he's never once lost it." Pruitt looked at the widow a long moment. Then he smiled slow. "The fair's got a distance race," he said. 2 miles, the Endurance Cup. Hale always enters his stallion in the sprint, and the distance both to sweep the day and prove his blood does everything. He rubbed his jaw. Nobody much enters the distance against him because his stallion wins it every year on class alone. If you put this colt in the 2-mile, then Hale can't refuse to run. Clara finished seeing it. Because he's got to enter the distance. It's his tradition, his sweep. He can't scratch out of it without every man there, knowing he ran scared from a fever calf. She felt the cold, clear certainty settle in. So we don't chase him. We just show up in the one race he can't dodge, and we make it long, and we let the road do what the road does. "You know," said Josiah Pruitt, "in 40 years of breeding the best cattle horses in America, I don't believe I ever met a soul who understood a horse better than you, and you, a farmer's widow who never owned but the one." He shook his head. "You didn't just save that colt, Ms. Whitmore. You're the only person alive who ever knew what he was actually for." The night before the fair, Clara sat up with the calf. She sat in the straw of the livery barn with her back against the stall wall and the yearling's head in her lap. And she talked to him low, the way she'd talked to him that first night on his knees in the road, the way she'd talked to Samuel's memory in the dark for 11 months. "Big day tomorrow," she said. "Bigger'n you know. Whole valley's coming to watch you run." She stroked the broad, flat forehead. "You don't care about any of that, do you? You don't know you're the best blood in the country. You don't know there's a man out there who threw fire at you and poisoned my well over you. You just know the water's clean and the hay's good, and there's a woman who won't quit fussing over you." She smiled in the dark. "Reckon that's the whole secret when it comes down to it. You never once knew you were supposed to be worthless. Nobody told you. So you just went on and lived like you weren't." The yearling breathed slow and easy under her hand. "I was supposed to be worthless too, you know," she whispered. "A widow alone. A fool who wasted her last money. The whole county decided it, same as they decided it about you." Her hand went still. "But you didn't quit on me, and I didn't quit on you. And tomorrow, we're going to stand up in front of all of them, every one of them that laughed, and we're going to show them what they were too busy and too scared and too proud to see." Her voice broke just slightly, and she let it. "Not for spite. Not even to beat him, though God knows I want to. But because there's a whole valley full of people out there who got told they were worthless too by that man, and by hard years, and by their own tired hearts. And if a fever calf and a broke widow can stand up and win, then maybe some of them will believe they can too." She sat with him till the sky went gray. And when the first light came through the cracks in the barn wall, Clara Whitmore stood up and brushed the straw from her skirts and looked down at the dust-colored yearling that had cost her $25 and given her back a reason to stand, and she said the last thing she said to him before the fair quiet, and sure the way you'd make a promise you meant to keep. "Come on then, let's go show them what we're worth." They came from every corner of 3 counties, and they came to see the widow's calf. That was the thing Clara noticed first, walking the yearling through the fairground gates in the early light that the crowd parted for her, and the parting wasn't scorn this time. Men she'd never met tipped their hats. Women who'd gone quiet when she passed all summer now caught her eye and nodded. Word had run ahead of her the way word does, and the story that reached the fairground was no longer the tale of a fool who'd wasted her money. It was the tale of a widow who'd stared down Victor Hale in the street and said no sale, and it had made her in a single day the most watched soul at the fair. "Do not look at them," Henrik murmured beside her, his arm still splinted, walking slow. "Look at your colt. The crowd will try to get inside your chest and rattle you. That is what a crowd is for. Keep your eyes on the one thing that matters, and let them shout." "I remember," Clara said. Slow, like a woman with somewhere to be. "Like a woman with somewhere to be," the old Dane agreed, and she heard the pride in it. They'd entered him in the 2-mile. The Endurance Cup. Josiah Pruitt had walked the registration through himself that morning, laid the Kingman papers on the table in front of the fair judges, sworn the yearling's blood before God and the county. And Clara had watched the judges' faces change as they read. Watched respectable men understand for the first time that the animal the widow was running was not a scrub at all, but the finest blood in the territory sold for pocket money out of Victor Hale's own panic. "He knows by now," Pruitt said, coming back from the registration table. "Hale, he's seen the entry. His stallion's down for the sprint and the distance both same as every year. He can't scratch the distance without the whole fair knowing he ran from you." The old man's eyes glinted. "He's cornered Ms. Whitmore. You cornered him into the one race he can't win and can't refuse. I've bought and sold cattle 40 years, and I never saw a prettier trap." "It's not a trap if the colt can't finish," Clara said. 2 miles is a long way for a yearling." "It's a long way for anything," Pruitt said. "That's the point. That's your whole point." She saw Hale across the grounds an hour before the race. He stood by his stallion. And Lord, the stallion was a beautiful thing Clara would give him, that a tall, glossy black, with a champion's arch to his neck, and 2 grand champion ribbons already won, and a groom on either side fussing over him like he was made of glass. Beside that animal, her dust-colored yearling looked exactly like what the auction yard had called him, 4 months before, a scrub. Lean, plain, unremarkable. A calf next to a king. And Victor Hale looked at Clara across that distance, and he smiled. It was not the cold, courteous smile she knew. It was worse. It was a confident smile, a certain smile, and it put a cold finger down her spine, because a desperate man does not smile like that unless he has found one more move, one last card the others didn't know he was holding. "He's got something," she said to Henrik low. "Look at him. He's not afraid anymore. He was afraid in the street. He's not afraid now." Henrik followed her gaze, and his face went grave. "You are right. Something has changed for him since yesterday." He frowned. A cornered man who smiles is a man who has stopped being cornered. The question is, how? They found out 20 minutes before the race. It was Tommy Lane who brought it, the boy tearing across the grounds the way he'd torn up the lane with the fire-warning Breathless Wild. "Ms. Whitmore." "The rules, they changed the rules." Hale went to the judges, and "There's a weight rule now. A rider weight, they just posted it." Clara's stomach dropped. "Slow down. What rule? Every horse in the distance race has got to carry a rider of 140 pounds. Hale said it's for fairness, so's a light rider can't give a horse advantage, and the judges, some of 'em owe him money. Ms. Whitmore, they went along." The boy gulped. "But that colt's a yearling. He's never carried near that much, and you're the only one who can ride him. He won't let nobody else near him, and you don't weigh but 110 soaking wet." There it was, the last card, the confident smile. Hale couldn't stop the calf from running, so he'd changed what the calf had to carry. 140 pounds was nothing to his big-boned trained stallion, but on a lean yearling that had spent his whole life half-starved, 30 extra pounds of dead weight over 2 miles could break him down, could founder him, could kill him. And the only rider the colt would tolerate was a woman who weighed 110, which meant 30 pounds of lead in the saddlebags, 30 pounds of punishment on a young horse's back for the length of a race that was already the hardest thing she'd ever asked of him. "He means to founder him," Henrik breathed. "Not disqualify him. Founder him. Break the colt down in front of everyone and call it the horse's own weakness. The scrub could not carry the weight, he will say. The blood was ruined after all, and no man could blame him for a rule that applied to every horse the same." Clara stood very still. The crowd was already gathering at the rail. Pruitt had gone gray. Even Ezra Lane, who'd found them in the growing crowd, had his fists clenched helpless at his sides. Every path forward looked like a trap: run the colt under the weight and risk breaking him for life, or scratch and hand Hale the victory, and the story the scrub whose owner lost her nerve at the last. And then Clara Whitmore did the thing that she had learned to do on a dying road and a poisoned well and a burning night. She stopped looking at the size of the thing against her, and she started looking cold and clear for the underside of it. "Mr. Pruitt," she said slowly. "The rule. Say it back to me exact. 140 pounds of what?" Pruitt blinked. "Rider weight. 140 pounds rider and tack together, they said. Rider and tack." Clara's eyes came up and something was kindling in them. Together. Not 140 pounds of rider. 140 pounds carried all told. Rider and saddle and everything on the horse's back. "That's what they posted, yes. Then it doesn't have to be dead lead in the bags," Clara said. "It has to be 140 pounds that's carried smart. That's balanced. That moves with him instead of against him." She turned to Henrik, and she was almost smiling now, that hard, clear smile the churchwomen wouldn't have known. "Hale's thinking like a rich man. He's thinking weight is weight. 30 pounds of lead's the same as 30 pounds of anything, because he's never in his life had to make a little bit of something do the work of a lot. But I have. I've been stretching a little to cover a lot for 11 months. She looked at the yearling. Dead weight founders a horse, but weight that's placed right low over his center weight that rides quiet and never fights him, a horse can carry that a long, long way. It's not how much he carries, it's how he carries it. You'd need a saddle built for it," Pruitt said slowly, catching the fire. "Weighted low in the tree over the withers and the loin where he's strongest, not swinging loose in the bags where it'll rock him." "Then we build it," Clara said. "We've got 20 minutes. Ezra, your boy said you'd give me your hands. I need them now. Mr. Pruitt, you've fitted 1,000 rigs, you tell me, where every ounce goes." She was already moving. "Henrik, get me lead, get me sand, get me anything dense, and I'll tell you no when it's enough. We're going to make Victor Hale's own rule carry my colt to the finish." They worked in the 20 minutes like people possessed. Pruitt and Ezra Lane, and 2 ranchers who'd come to help stripped a saddle down and rebuilt it, packing weight low and tight against the tree, right over the yearling's strongest bearing points, balanced left and right to the ounce, so nothing would rock or swing or fight the horse's stride. Clara herself weighed light in the saddle, and Pruitt called the weights, and Henrik ran them, and they built up to 140 pounds total that sat so low and so quiet on the colt's back that when Clara mounted and walked him, he didn't so much as flick an ear at it. "He can't feel it fighting him," Pruitt breathed, watching the yearling move. "God almighty, Ms. Whitmore, it's there but it's not fighting him. He'll feel it as tired over 2 miles, but he won't feel it as an enemy. He might—" The old man's voice caught. "He might just be able to carry it." "He'll carry it," Clara said. "He's carried worse. He carried himself up a road when he couldn't stand. This is nothing next to that." And across the grounds, Victor Hale watched the widow's men swarm over a saddle and watched the yearling walk out quiet under a weight that should have made him buck and struggle. And Clara saw the confident smile falter on the cattle king's face for the second time that summer. Saw him realize slow that the last card he'd been so sure of had just been turned back over in a woman's steady hands. They lined up at the rail, 11 horses for the 2 mile. Though everyone knew it was really only 2, the black champion and the dust-colored scrub, and the rest, just filling out the field. Clara sat the yearling quiet at the line. Her heart was going the old scared drum, but her hands were steady on the reins, and she leaned down close to the broad flat forehead and said the only thing there was left to say. "Long haul now," she whispered. "Not the burst. You've never won the burst in your life, and we're not going to try today. You just do the one thing you know how to do better than any horse that ever lived. You don't quit. That black horse is going to leave us in the dust the first half mile, and the whole crowd's going to laugh, and I need you not to care. You've been laughed at before. It never once killed you." She straightened. "We run our race, not his, ours, all the way to the end." The starter's gun cracked, and it happened exactly as she'd said it would. Hale's black champion exploded off the line like a shot, and the crowd roared, and inside a quarter mile the stallion had 4 lengths, and then 6. And then the whole field was strung out behind him. And Clara's yearling was dead last. Running easy. Running slow. Running the only pace Clara would let him run. And the laughter started up in the crowd. The old laughter. The auction yard laughter. "Look at the scrub. Look at the fool widow dead last," just like we always said. Clara didn't hear it. She'd stopped hearing that laughter months ago. She sat quiet and let the black horse burn himself glorious out front, and she watched him with a cold, clear eye, and she counted. Because a quarter-miler runs like fire, and fire she knew better than anyone alive in that valley does not last. Fire runs and runs, and then it comes up against something it can't cross, and it falters, and it dies. Half a mile. The black was 6 lengths up and flying. The crowd sang. 3/4. Still 6 lengths. But Clara saw the first hitch. The first heaviness come into the stallion's glorious stride. The burst starting to cost him. 1 mile the halfway. And now the yearling, running that same patient, relentless pace he'd never once broken from, had begun without seeming to speed up at all to close. Not because he was faster, because the black was slowing. Because a horse bred and trained for the quarter mile was 1.5 miles into a 2-mile race, his whole body had never been built to finish. The laughter in the crowd began raggedly to change. 1.25 miles, 4 lengths now. The black's neck was dark with sweat, his breath coming in great tearing heaves, and his rider was already at him with the whip already asking for more, and there was less and less to give. And behind him, quiet, steady, tireless, came the dust-colored yearling under his impossible weight, running the exact same pace he'd run from the gun, the pace of an animal that had learned in its bones that the world is long and hard and dry, and the only way through it is to not ever for any reason stop. 1.5 miles. 2 lengths. And the crowd was on its feet now, all of it. And the sound it made was no longer laughter. It was something else entirely. A great rising roar of disbelief and hope, because they were seeing it happen, seeing the thing they'd all been too proud and too scared to believe the scrub was catching the champion. "Now!" Henrik shouted at the rail horse. "Now, Clara!" "Not yet," Clara said to herself to the colt low. "Not yet. Let him burn. Let him spend the last of it. Not yet. 1 length. 6 furlongs to go." The black horse was dying under his rider, foundering, his stride gone ragged and short, his great burst finally completely spent and still. Clara held her yearling to that patient killing pace, drawing level with the champion's flank level. With his shoulder, the 2 horses running head to head for one endless stretch, while the whole valley screamed. And Victor Hale at the rail stopped smiling forever. "Now," Clara whispered, and she leaned down over the dust-colored neck, and she gave him for the first and only time in the whole race the smallest ask, not a whip. She never carried a whip, just her hands and her voice, and the weight of everything they'd survived together. And she said the word she'd said to him the first night in the road on her knees in the dust, when the whole world had already buried him. "Live," she said. "Come on now, live." And the yearling ran. Not fast. He had never been fast, but free at last of holding back, pouring out the endurance the hard road had bred into his bones, the deep, bottomless stubbornness that no amount of Kentucky breeding could give a horse, that only the dying road could teach. And he pulled away from the foundering champion length by length, while the crowd came apart at the seams, and he ran under 30 pounds of lead, placed smart and low, and never once faltered. And he crossed the finish line of the 2-mile endurance cup, 4 lengths clear, and still impossibly wanting more. The dust-colored calf that nobody bid on had beaten the grand champion. The silence lasted exactly 1 heartbeat. Then the fairground exploded. Clara didn't hear the words in it. She heard only the great wall of sound, and she felt the yearling slow beneath her, blowing hard. But sound in every leg, not foundered, not broken, carried through by weight, placed smart, and a pace held true. And the one thing Victor Hale had never once been able to breed or buy or take away. And Clara Whitmore bent down over her colt's neck in the middle of that roaring crowd, and she wept at last openly for the first time in a year, into the dust-colored mane of a $25 calf that had just carried her out the far side of the worst summer of her life. Henrik reached them first, his splinted arm and all, and put his good hand on her knee and couldn't speak. Then Tommy Lane, jumping, screaming, half laughing and half crying. Then Ezra Lane and Pruitt, with tears running open down his weathered face. And then the crowd itself closing in around the widow, and her colt hats coming off hands reaching out just to touch the animal. The animal they'd all laughed at. The animal that had just proved every one of them wrong. And in the middle of it, a path opened, and Victor Hale walked through it. The crowd went quiet as he came. He walked stiff and old, and there was something broken in his face that Clara had never seen there. The look of a man who has watched the whole thing he built on other people's fear come down around him in the space of 2 miles. He stopped in front of her colt. He looked at it a long time. "I'll give you $5,000 for him," he said. His voice was low. It had nothing left in it. "Right now. Cash. Name any price above it, and I'll pay that too." And the crowd stiffened and waited, and Clara looked down at the man from the height of the horse he'd tried 3 times to kill. "Mr. Hale," she said. And she was not cruel, because she'd never been cruel, because cruelty was his country and not hers. "You still think this is about money. You've thought it was about money since the auction yard. That's the whole reason you lost." She stroked the colt's neck. "You looked at this animal the first day and saw $2. And I looked at him and saw something worth not quitting on. That's the only difference there ever was between us, and it's the one difference no amount of your money can ever close." She shook her head slow. "He's not for sale. He was never for sale. Some things aren't, and the tragedy of your whole life, Victor, is that you never once believed that was true." Victor Hale stood there in the silence a moment longer. And then, and the whole valley saw it, and the whole valley remembered it. The cattle king who had ruled 3 counties on the back of everyone's fear took off his fine gray hat, and he held it against his chest, and he inclined his head to the widow Whitmore and her $25 horse, and he turned, and he walked away through a crowd that no longer looked at its boots when he passed. He sold the bar-M before the first snow. Nobody in the valley was sorry to see him go. And the river that he'd charged 2 bits a head to drink from ran free after that for everyone, because the men he'd bled all summer had learned watching a widow and a scrub that a thing is only worth what you let a man make you believe it's worth, and they had stopped all of them at last believing Victor Hale. The rains came in the fall the way they always do after the hard summers when you've near stopped believing in them. Clara paid off her note to the cattleman's bank with the Endurance Cup's purse and the first stud fees, because half the ranchers in 3 counties wanted the dust-colored horse's blood in their herds. Now, and they came to her with their hats in their hands and their money in the open, and she named her price fair and never once gouged a soul, because she remembered what it was to be poor and laughed at and squeezed by a man who owned the water. She kept the 40 acres. Samuel's 40 acres. She fixed the roof and dug the well clean and planted it back to grass, and the grass came green over the ground. The fire had blackened the way it always does, because the land is patient even when the people on it are not. And in the spring, the dust-colored horse threw his first foal. Clara was there for it in the clean straw of a barn that was hers now, free and clear at 4 in the morning, the way she'd sat with his sire that first terrible night. She brought the foal into the world with her own 2 hands, and it stood inside the hour wobbling and stubborn and already watching everything with those dark, alert, ready eyes, and Clara Whitmore looked at it and knew the way Henrik had taught her to know that the blood had bred true, that the endurance and the stubbornness and the refusal to quit had carried straight down from the calf nobody bid on into this new small life, shaking itself dry in the lamplight. "Well," she said softly, kneeling in the straw, "look at you. Look what your daddy made." Henrik stood in the barn door watching his arm long-healed. "What will you call it?" Clara looked at the foal a long time, and she thought about the road and the fire and the whole long summer, and about a widow who was supposed to be worthless standing up in front of a valley that had laughed, and about how the thing they call worthless is so often only a thing nobody has learned to see yet. "Comet," she said. "Because a comet comes out of the dark where nobody's looking, and it burns brighter than anything in the sky, and then it's gone before the folks who missed it can ever say they saw it coming." She stood and brushed the straw from her skirts and looked out the barn door at her own green land under the rising sun. "This one, though, this one folks are going to see coming, because I'm going to make sure not a single soul in this valley ever again looks at a small thing shaking in the dust and calls it worthless before they've bothered to find out what it's for." And that spring and every spring after, on the 40 acres, Samuel Whitmore left to a wife the whole county had written off the dust-colored horse, and his children ran free in green grass under an open sky, living proof for anyone who cared to drive out and see it, that the thing you throw away for $2 in the mercy pen might just be the thing that was worth everything all along, if only you'd had the eyes to see it, and the heart to feed it, and the plain, stubborn courage to never ever quit on it when the whole world told you to. Clara Whitmore had paid $25 for a dying calf that nobody wanted, and it had given her back her whole life.